Okay, so, admittedly, I got a bit swamped while writing the script. I didn't anticipate Hoyo to be pumping out this much lore. I already made a video talking about the Notcry teaser and the web event, but today we're talking about shades. I thought that a reveal to this scale would happen sometime during the Krai chapter, but, apparently, nope. We get to see the 4 shades of the primordial one before we get to see the Cryo Archon. Funny how that turns out. Anyways, today I thought I'd break down the new teaser Hoyo put out, because it is dense with so many reveals. I'd like to first talk about the shades themselves, before going more into the actual contents of the actual teaser and what is said and done by both the shades and our big boy Pierro. I hope you don't mind the weird format. Without further ado, let's first talk about the shades. For this first section of this video, I'll be doing a little character introduction for each of the 4 shining shades, starting with the shade we most recently saw in the Natlan Archon quest, that being Renova, the Shade of Death. Now, in the Natlan Archon quest, we learned that she helped the Lord of the Night in Natlan establish rules and create the Night Kingdom. Apparently, she did this from the bottom of her heart, as an act of reparation and love, but this act was also considered by the Heavenly Principles as a bit blasphemous, as Renova stepped out of line and overreached her authorities as a shade. At the end of the Natlan Archon quest, Renova is present as this massive eye in the sky, demanding Malwika's life for using her power to defeat Gosoithoth. At the last minute, Capitano shows up and offers his life instead, which the Lord of the Night is happy to take, thus putting the captain in this sort of paradox state. He's both dead and simultaneously unable to die, permanently being a source of power for the Lord of the Night. With the Natlan Archon quest out of the way, what did we learn about Renova in the teaser? Well, first off, we get a glimpse of her design, and we can see that the whole blood red eye motif is present everywhere on her character. Additionally, the wings behind her look suspiciously familiar. Direct your attention to the statue of the omnipresent god in Inazuma. Not only are there eyes on the wings of that statue, but there's also a vision at the center of its chest. Looking back at Renova's design, she has a crimson eye at the center of her chest. These parallels might be a wink-wink nod-nod at Pierro's speech later in the trailer, where he likens visions to the gaze of the gods. Renova's chest containing an eye and the statue of the omnipresent god in Inazuma might suggest that it's the shades, not the archons, that dictate who obtains visions, but that's just speculation on my end rather than a full-fledged theory. Additionally, Renova's wings look a lot like the Staff of Homa, which makes sense because the Staff of Homa was used in rituals to cleanse the miasmas produced by dead gods. In other words, the Staff of Homa is used to purify dead gods, so it would make sense that its power stems from the Shade of Death. There are also 2 other loose visual connections I could make with Renova, the first of which is the symbol for the Masters of the Nightwind. If we look at their symbol, obviously it's supposed to be reminiscent of the wings of the Ectomosaur, but come on, that shape is nearly identical to the Staff of Homa and the wings of Renova and the statue in Inazuma. Furthermore, the Masters of the Nightwind have the closest connection with the Night Kingdom, which is, in part, created by Renova. The last connection I want to draw upon is A's elemental skill, where she summons a ring behind her. At the top of this ring is an eye, and while it could just be any regular old eye, the more I look at it, the more it's starting to look like the eye that Renova represents herself. A is also the Archon of Inazuma, where the statue of the omnipresent god is, so perhaps Inazuma as a whole has more connections to the Shade of Death than we originally thought. Perhaps the statue of the omnipresent god is a statue of Renova, for we never really got a concrete answer as to what god that statue is supposed to represent. Next on the list, we have our favorite overachiever, Rhinedottir. I mean, not only is she one of the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah, but she's also a member of the Hexen Circle. In the Paralogism Archon quest, we learn that she fused with Naberius, the Shade of Life, and now we get the reveal that she's one of the Shades themselves as a result from the fusion. She's shaping up to be one of Genshin's most powerful characters, I feel like. At least, now we know why she's been so busy. She's busy being a damn Shade and working for Celestia. Rhinedottir, also known as Gold, or R of the Hexen Circle, was associated with the Khaenri'ah Cataclysm 500 years prior to the game's start. She is a practitioner of Chemia, a form of alchemy developed in Khaenri'ah associated with the creation of life. She created Durin and Albedo, and is speculated to have created Elenus as well. She also created the Riftwolves, shadowy monsters that invaded Teyvat during and after the Cataclysm. Durin wreaked havoc as well, specifically targeting Mondstadt, though it's unclear whether Rhinedottir Rhinedottir knew that her creations would cause harm, or if she even intended for her creations to cause harm in the first place. One day, after creating her so-called perfect creation, Albedo, they stumbled across the heart of Naberius. Rhinedottir devoured it, as one does, you go queen, you ate, and she became one with her. Then she told Albedo to discover the truth and meaning of the world and to go to Mondstadt to get Alice's help. On the other hand, Naberius is the Shade of Life, who was responsible for creating plants, animals, and humans on Teyvat. After the death of the original Hydro Dragon, the Primordial Sea needed a new heart, so Naberius created Egeria, the first Hydro Archon of Fontaine. In the teaser, we see that Rhinedottir and Naberius look very similar to one another, and I find that really interesting. We have many cases in the game where gods sort of have two versions of themselves. A and Makoto were twins, Nahida and Rukkhadevata look identical to one another, and Albedo even faced off against a creation that looked identical to himself, Subject 2. I'm not saying Albedo is a god here, he was created by Rhinedottir, so I figured I might as well lump him in with my other examples. Anyway, my point is that characters having dual versions of themselves is not exactly a new concept in Genshin, and it's interesting that we have an example of this in action with one of the shades. Perhaps Rhinedottir didn't always look this way, and maybe Naberius didn't always look this way as well, but after fusing with one another, their appearances kind of blended, and they grew to look more like each other, perhaps. It would be very coincidental if Rhinedottir and Naberius just happened to look very similar, because, come on, look at that. Look at their appearances, you can't tell them apart. Aside from that, we learn that Naberius doesn't have any agency over her body. Well, their body, since she shares one with Rhinedottir. However, we see in the trailer that there's sort of this inner world that Rhinedottir can retreat to, in which Naberius can essentially scold Rhinedottir for saying or doing certain things that questions her loyalty to the heavenly principles. We see that Rhinedottir has a gold halo floating behind her, fitting since one of her nicknames is gold, while Naberius has a blue halo floating behind her, which I posit is because of her connection with the element of Hydro. Additionally, at the start of the teaser, we get a glimpse of what Naberius looked like prior to her merging with Rhinedottir. She is dressed in flowy clothes that are much more white, lacks the hood that Rhinedottir wears, and most importantly, her hair is white, as opposed to blonde, with an orange ombre, leading me to believe that Rhinedottir is the person who originally had that color of hair. Rhinedottir is dressed very similarly to Naberius in the present, though half of her robes are black and the gem on her hood is gold, as opposed to blue like Naberius. Next up, we have Istaroth, the Shade of Time, and Venti's drag persona. And I'm only half kidding when I say that, by the way. Istaroth is perhaps the most active shade in Teyvat's history, intervening and being worshipped by various cultures across Teyvat. In Mondstadt, she was worshipped alongside the Anemo Archon, and was known as the Thousand Winds. However, over time, the worship of Istaroth in Mondstadt slowly dwindled, and people came to believe that Barbados was their only god. In A's second story quest, she believes that Istaroth helped Makoto plant the sacred Sakura using some time manipulation shenanigans, preventing abyssal corruption in Inazuma. After Ankanomiya sunk into the depths, the prayers of the Ankanomians went unheard by the heavenly principles and 3 of their shades, but Istaroth heard them and chose to answer their prayers. Out of respect and reverence for Istaroth, the Ankanomians didn't call her by her name, but rather called her Kairos, or Tokoyo Ukami. When it comes to Istaroth's design, surprisingly, I don't have much to say. I've seen people say that the halo around Istaroth and these ornate things behind her look a lot like clock hands, which, I mean, sure, it would be fitting since she's the Shade of Time, but I struggle to connect that specific design motif to anything we've seen in the game. Some people are saying that the clock we use in the game looks a lot like the clock hands behind Istaroth, but I'm struggling to see that. I guess it's a similar design, but I don't know. Rather, I would like to point your attention to Istaroth's hands. If you look closely, they seem to be withered somewhat, and I was immediately reminded of Arlecchino and Caterpillar. Arlecchino's hands are blackened, and so are Caterpillar's, so what does that mean, exactly? Well, to be honest, I have no clue. Arlecchino and Caterpillar's condition was never explicitly explained in-game, and all we have are theories, really. People speculate that the reasoning behind Arlecchino and Caterpillar's condition is that perhaps it's a result of the curse of the wilderness, as Caterpillar's true form is a hilly churl. I've never really bought into that theory, because I think it's a stretch to also suggest that Arlecchino is secretly a hilly churl, but if you are a true believer that the curse of the wilderness makes your limbs go black, then perhaps you can draw a connection to Istaroth. Perhaps she was the shade who cursed people with the curse of the wilderness. Besides that loose connection, I really don't have anything more to say about Istaroth. I would love to hear in the comments what connections you folks spotted that I didn't already cover. With Renova, Rhinedottir, and Istaroth out of the way, let's talk about another big reveal this teaser gave us. The unknown god we fight with our twin at the start of the game is a shade, and her name is Asmoday, the Shade of Space. This confirmation is huge, as in the past, the identity of the unknown god was a huge topic of speculation. It was obvious that the unknown god worked for the Heavenly Principles as she introduces herself as the Sustainer, but now we know for certain that she is a shade, and the Shade of Space nonetheless. At the beginning of the game, the Traveler and their twin are trying to leave Teyvat, but Asmoday appears and prevents them from leaving. She traps one of the twins in a bunch of red cubes, and the rest is history. When it comes to Asmoday's design, well, I feel like I don't need to mull on it too much. We've seen her design since the beginning of the game, we're all familiar with her red cubes and star-shaped portals, and a bunch of theories on the internet stem from certain people or things having visual connections to Asmoday. Really, I just want to get onto the next part of the video where I get to dissect the contents of the teaser. At the beginning of the teaser, we see an elderly woman reciting a story to a group of onlookers. She tells this group of onlookers about the nature of the world. She tells them that life abides no reason, for none are born by their consent. She tells them that death abides no reason, for it cannot be defied, even by those who see it coming. She tells them that time abides no reason, for it deprives us all equally, yet brooks not a second to be reclaimed. She starts to tell the group of onlookers that space abides no reason, but before she can finish, something weird happens to her. It seems as if she is mind-jacked, and she talks about the golden-haired twin travelers being mercilessly torn apart by the ruler of space. Then Renova kills everybody, turning the atmosphere into an eerie red. Renova tells Rhinedottir to stop littering other people's spaces with her creations, and Rhinedottir replies by saying that the ruler of space has tainted all life in this specific area, rendering it unstable, and that running another experiment such as this would be fruitless. Rhinedottir briefly gets pulled into her digitized headspace where she gets a scolding from Naberius, and we are told that while Naberius has no agency of their body anymore, she's still able to annoy Rhinedottir. We learned a couple of things during this exchange. First of all, it seems as though the Shade of Space has the power to taint life, whatever that means. We also learned that the Shades are experimenting with this created space that, supposedly, Asmoday created, and Rhinedottir is littering Asmoday's space by putting her creations inside of it. Either Asmoday's power or Renova's presence caused the people in the specific space to wither and die, and seemingly suffer prophetic visions. Moving on, Renova turns her attention to Istaroth, who is sitting idly in a nearby tree. She asks Istaroth why she bestowed history upon Rhinedottir's creations, to which she replies in a very nonchalant manner, that she was just passing the time. Istaroth also mentions that Asmoday is not here, to which Renova responds that she should share her opinion sooner next time. Renova further says that there are no traces of Asmoday in this weird space, and we see her essentially kill the entire world, which collapses into a crimson cube, the type of cubes associated with Asmoday, before collapsing into nothing at all. The three shades are then transported into this mystical space with a golden staircase and a magical golden fountain in the center. Istaroth states that the meetings the shades partake in are just a formality, and it doesn't really matter that only 3 of the shades are present this time. Renova insists that they should try to find Asmoday, and none of the shades have never missed a meeting, but Istaroth suggests that perhaps Asmoday switched sides. Renova initially believes her claim to be preposterous, but thinks for a second and posits that maybe Asmoday loves her new master more than she loves herself. So the plot thickens. Apparently, Asmoday is gone, and not even the 3 other shades know where she is, which begs the question, who is Asmoday working for? Well, there are a few options. Some people seem to believe that Asmoday is Paimon, because Asmoday and Paimon share a few visual features, such as the Primogem-like piece in her hair, matching the portals used by Asmoday. However, Paimon also has visual features similar to the other shades, like her halo matching Istaroth's, and the triquetra on her chest matching Renova's triquetras on her legs. In the Space and Time for You Archon quest, when we talk to our sibling in a strange space and time, made possible only by Istaroth, we see Asmoday's portals appear. As Paimon wasn't allowed in the space, some people suggest that the presence of these portals and the absence of Paimon could mean that Paimon is eavesdropping on us. Renova suggests that Asmoday loves her new master more than she loves herself, and Paimon certainly loves the Traveler, I would say. The timeline of Asmoday's disappearance is quite weird as well, because we actually don't know when exactly this teaser even takes place, or if the various scenes occur concurrently or not. Overall, the situation around Asmodee is quite weird, and there are a ton of different possibilities, and I don't feel too strongly in one direction or another. While the Paimon connections do have merit, I feel like Asmodee could also be working for the Abyss Order, or even the Fatui if we're talking about factions that oppose Celestia. I feel like, as of right now, we don't know enough about Asmodee's motivations to accurately predict where her allegiances lie as of right now. Heck, we were only just told that she is in fact the unknown god we saw at the start of the game. The fact that such a big portion of this teaser trailer was devoted to Asmodee's whereabouts suggests to me that this plot point in particular will be relevant during the Notcry chapter. After the Shades contemplate Asmodee's disappearance, Istaroth notices something and tells Renova that she's being watched. It's then revealed that Pierro, alongside some Fatui officers, are directly gazing at the Shades. Renova recognizes Pierro's eyes and she says that they looked at her when she placed the Curse of Immortality on the Conrians. This reveal is huge, as we now know that it was Renova who placed the Curse of Immortality on the Conrians, and that Pierro saw her directly. Anyway, Rhinedottir reveals that she used to be acquaintances with Pierro, which I suppose makes sense, as they were both prominent figures within the Conrian court. We don't exactly know how interwoven or connected these two are, but it's news that those two knew each other personally. Rhinedottir continues by saying that Pierro has probably let go of his past obsessions because he's now working with the Tsaritsa. Renova says that the power of the Tsaritsa is paltry, or quite pathetic in other words, and Rhinedottir counters by saying that the Heavenly Principles is yet to awaken, and if she were in the Cryo Archon's shoes, she wouldn't pass the opportunity to gaze upon the Heavenly Principles. Rhinedottir is pulled back into her inner world, where Naberius scolds her by saying that she cannot allow Rhinedottir to think this way, which Rhinedottir deflects by saying it was purely hypothetical. Renova then suggests that the Shades now intervene, to the extent permitted by the rules. This is the part of the trailer that gets me excited for the story going forward. We now have a more nuanced understanding of the Fatui and their dynamic with the Heavenly Principles. Well, at least their Shades. We now know that Renova placed the Curse of Immortality on the Conrians, and Pierro was there to directly witness it. And that makes his hatred of Celestia feel much more personal. In the past, we've been told about Pierro and the Fatui and how they oppose Celestia one way or another, but to see this animosity firsthand just feels different. Additionally, Rhinedottir's acquaintanceship with Pierro makes the conflict between the Fatui and the Shades more personal as well. We know that Pierro didn't always hate Celestia, rather, he was disillusioned by the Heavenly Principles and the Shades after they cast the Curse of Immortality. Prior to that, he urged the King of Conria against tearing away the Veil of Sin, but he wasn't listened to, bringing divine wrath to the nation. Imagine how pissed off Pierro must be at Rhinedottir specifically. Rhinedottir was linked to the Cataclysm and might have even been a big reason why it started in the first place, if we assume that the presence of her creatures brought forth Celestia's wrath. So Rhinedottir might have been a reason why Pierro's homeland got destroyed, but not only that, Rhinedottir now has the gall to join the Heavenly Principles, which Pierro also has beef with. I can only imagine how much he hates Rhinedottir. Moreover, Renova's statements make me think that the Shades will have a much more active role in the story going forward, and perhaps the Shades might even become playable. Some might argue that the power of the Shades wouldn't be compatible with any of the existing elements, but I disagree. Much like how Skirk uses the power of Cryo to blend in, so to speak, and does so using a form of mimicry linked to the Abyss, I think it's feasible that the Shades could do something similar. The elements do come from the Light Realm, which should be accessible by the Shades, so it might be reasonable to assume that instead of using pure light power, the Shades might correlate to one element. We already kind of see this in the game. Renova is likened to Pyro because of her associations with the Staff of Homa, as well as having a perfect color palette to be a Pyro unit. Naberius, prior to her merging with Rhinedottir, was associated most prominently with the Primordial Sea, as she created Egeria. It would stand to reason then that she would be a Hydro unit. Istaroth is blatantly an anima unit, as she is called the Thousand Winds and was worshipped by the people of Mondstadt, and as for Asmodee, well, I don't know. The cube-like shapes she uses suggests Geo to me, but that might be a bit of a stretch. It might even be a bit of a stretch to suggest that the Shades will be playable at all, but come on. Hoyo, this is a great opportunity to capitalize on the hype of this teaser. Let's move on to the final bit of this teaser, where we get a monologue by Pierro. He states that the gaze of the gods is associated with the term visions, and though people have always yearned for the gaze of the gods, if they gazed upon the gods, they would only invite ruin. He states that he has endured the ruin of nations, the death of many, and that he knows firsthand what the price is for gazing upon the gods. He ends his speech by questioning what the price would be for killing the gods, and telling people who are afraid to look upon the heavens that the Tsaritsa asserts, even the gods have their limits. As much as all of this is in line with his character, this monologue really just confirms what we already know about Pierro. It's insinuated that he might know some secret behind the origin of visions, but besides that, Pierro really doesn't offer us any new lore drops. However, while Pierro is indulging in his monologue, he's walking through different areas of Notcry, and I'll focus my analysis on the regions we see instead. First off, we see the massive machine the Fatui are built in Notcry. We still don't know what this machine could be for, but we see that it's powered with this energy core, and presumably it serves as the base of operation for the Fatui in Notcry. I've seen several theories that this base looks kind of like a moon if you were to theoretically squish it together, and I guess I get what these people mean. It's in a sort of spherical shape, and seeing as Notcry relates very heavily to the Welkin moon, I wouldn't put it past the Fatui to have the resources and technology to be able to build their own Death Star. After the Fatui base, Pierro walks by this abandoned-looking building with an antenna on it. At least, it looks kind of like an antenna, just a bit thicker. I don't know what I would describe that as. Anyway, I had trouble figuring out what this place might be until it dawned on me. We might be looking at the lighthouse of the Lightkeepers. At first glance, you might be thinking, that thing looks nothing like a lighthouse. Well, if you remember, the Long Night's Oath artifact set mentions that the Lightkeepers are only at a fraction of their power when compared to what they had in the past. They are pretty beaten up right now due to their past encounters with the Wild Hunt, sort of like the Fontaine Research Institute. What if this is what the lighthouse looks like right now? Or perhaps this is a new base used by the Lightkeepers, and they simply moved here after being evicted from their old home. I looked at all the factions present in Notcry, and I thought that the Lightkeepers being associated with this site was the most compelling. Another possibility, I guess, is that this is a hideout of the treasure hoarders, or maybe even another Fatui base, but I don't really have any evidence to back those claims up. Pierro then moves on to this strange valley with huge blue plants and a fan-shaped landscape. I think this area might be associated with the Snowland Fae, just because I'm getting an air of whimsy just looking at this place. From a purely visual perspective, I can see this area being a place inhabited by the Snowland Fae or the Frostmoon Scions. There's an ice magic feel to the area, which I associate with two of the more mystic inhabitants of Notcry. However, we see Hisi Island later in the trailer, so I think this area will be inhabited by the Snowland Fae. After that, there's this really interesting area with a purple atmosphere and a parked boat. In the background, you can see Sumeri's Girdle of the Sands region, which is fun because this is our third region in a row that uses the Sumeri Desert as a method of entry. Anyway, this region has an interesting atmosphere and some cool plants, but I can't really deduce what all of that means. I'd rather talk about this ship. While its features are indiscernible, I have a wild guess. What if this is a ship that the Knights of Favonius took to Notcry? Okay, I suppose that's a bold claim. This ship could belong to the treasure hoarders or something, but because of the ship's placement being near Sumeru, I think this is one of the first places in Notcry we will be able to explore. And during a dev livestream, it's mentioned that we will be meeting Varka when we first step foot into Notcry. We know that Varka has been on a huge expedition for a while now, and that expedition has led him to Notcry. What if this is the boat that he took to get there, and now it serves as a base of operations for the Knights of Favonius? After the strange boat, Pierro walks past a frozen ley line looking thing. I'm not really sure what that's about, and then he walks past a scenic forest. In the background, there seems to be a mechanical hand, a tiny dwelling, and a statue of a head. I don't know why, but this mishmash of stuff gives me an Effa vibe, so this could be near where the Krumkake workshop is, but I'm grasping at straws here. Pierro ends his journey in what seems to be Nasha Town, where we get a glimpse of the city's energy source. It seems to be a smaller version of whatever is powering the Fatui base, so maybe whatever these balls are, they have something to do with the moon. It's interesting to think that the Voynich Guild, the closest thing Notcry has to a governmental body, has this energy source in the middle of their town, but the Fatui has a much bigger version of it. Maybe this insinuates that the Fatui are getting increasingly pushy when it comes to Notcry's autonomy, seeing as they have a pretty big presence there already. Perhaps the story of Notcry could be us siding with the region to preserve its autonomy while the Fatui tries to seize control of its power. What power could the Fatui possibly be seizing? Well, at the end of the video, we get one final lore bomb. Apparently, the Pale Star Edict has dictated that the Fatui need to retrieve the damselet from Notcry. We see Colombina standing in a field of flowers that kind of look like intivats, but are distinctly not intivats. There's this weird glitching effect around her body, and she isn't really moving. The Fatui officer reciting the Pale Star Edict says that they will retrieve Colombina no matter what it takes, and another officer orders him to make sure that the Frostmoon Scions aren't a threat. This short sequence has a lot of implications. First of all, it's pretty much confirmed at this point that we will be getting Colombina in the 6.x story. And judging from the Notcry specific teaser we got, as well as the Notcry web event, I'd wager that she's our Archon equivalent in 6.x and will be playable. People have speculated that she's a Seelie, because of the visual resemblance she has to our friendly withered angels, and while I didn't always subscribe to that theory, this teaser, as well as the lore of the finale of the Deep Galleries, kind of makes me a believer of the whole Colombina is the first angel theory. According to the lore of the artifact set, which I will make a video about eventually, I promise, the first angel orchestrated the creation of the Snowland Fae and resided in the city of Hyperborea before the death of the Moon Sisters and subsequent curse of the Seelie race. This inextricably ties Colombina to Notcry, and judging that we learn about Hyperborea and the first angel in the artifact set right before Notcry is set to release, on top of the fact that Colombina will play a role in Notcry, something definitely seems fishy. The fact that Colombina is looking more likely to be the first angel by the day, and the fact that she's working for the Fatui is rife with implications that I will probably go over when I make my video on the lore of the finale of the Deep Galleries, but I want to focus on why the Fatui needs to retrieve her in the first place. First off, I don't think Colombina has defected from the Fatui. If we are to believe that she is the first angel, well, the first angel became disillusioned with Celestia after coming into contact with a Voyager from out of space. That's more finale of the Deep Gallery stuff. Apologies for anyone who's lost. The Fatui are directly oppositional against Celestia as well, so it would make sense for the Tsaritsa and the Colombina to be ideologically aligned. I think what's happening here is that Celestia is controlling Colombina somehow. Renova did say that the Shades will now intervene as a direct result of the Fatui daring to gaze at the gods. Colombina might also be Notcry's equivalent to an Archon, so the fact that she's glitching is concerning. In the Notcry teaser, she's talking about the moon's fall, and the field of flowers she's standing on turns red. The glitching effects plus the red kind of reminds me of Renova's power, and that would track because the Shades will be more active in the story going forward. In any case, I think Notcry will have a very Colombina-centric story, but the fact that the video for the Shades is tied to Colombina and the Fatui and prominently shows them suggests to me that these factions will come to butt heads in the Notcry story. Whatever the case may be, I think Genshin is approaching the endgame now. With the Shades being involved, things are sure to get interesting.